Again with the cheating. Please, let's just get a divorce. After 4 years of marriage, which wasn't all that long, I finally asked for a divorce. My in-laws sided with me, sternly voicing their opinions to my husband, Stanley. Stanley seemed furious at first, but then he gave a sleazy smile. "Fine, I'll give you a divorce. But there's a condition." And said, "Name any condition you want. I just don't intend to stay your wife any longer. Then take my parents and our 2 kids and get out. No division of property or child support." Stanley continued with a mocking thin smile. "See, being cheated on is partially your fault too. I'm tired of your gloomy face. Plus, a handsome man with a history of divorce has a certain allure to women, doesn't it?" Not bad at all. It seems Stanley still didn't take my words seriously. Your new place." After I sent Stanley a picture of the new place. "I am Sophia, 28 years old. A mom to 3-year-old twin girls. My husband, Stanley, is 32, 4 years older than me. He works in sales at a trading company. We got married 4 years ago, after I got pregnant during our dating period. It was what you'd call a shotgun marriage. Stanley was a salesperson visiting the company I worked for, and from the first sight, I admired him for his coolness. After a few work-related encounters, we got closer, and when he asked to meet outside of work, I was over the moon. That's how good an impression Stanley made on me. Tall like a model, with a fit physique, a pleasantly deep voice, and of course, more handsome than any actor you might come across. After a few dates, we became close, and before I knew it, I was pregnant. As I nervously broke the news to Stanley, he happily suggested we get married. I was thrilled. It felt like a dream come true, like I was the heroine of a happy ending story. But once we were together, it wasn't the happy ending story I imagined, but rather a tacky drama of a cheating husband. Stanley was indeed good-looking and skilled at handling women. I mistook that for being gentlemanly and felt cherished. And him quickly suggesting marriage, I believed it to be a sign of his love, but for Stanley, it was just acquiring a convenient tool for his future escapades. Unaware of this, I agreed to marry Stanley, and soon after, we moved in with his parents. "I can't leave you alone at home in such a condition. I have to work. It worries me. Can't you live with my parents? You don't have your own home to return to. I'd like that." My parents had passed away when I was entering the workforce. With no siblings, I had no reason to refuse. Deceived by those words, I ended up living with Stanley's parents. Luckily, Stanley's parents were good people. If they had been unbearable in-laws from a cheating drama, I would have been desperate long ago. "Don't worry about living expenses. I'm a top salesman. I earn enough to support you and the kids. Quit your job and peacefully have our children." When it was revealed that the new life inside me was twins, Stanley said this and urged me to quit my job. I loved my job and was attached to the workplace I had been part of since graduating from college. The only thing I hesitated over was my first childbirth, especially with twins, which made me anxious, so I quit my job following Stanley's advice. Thus, I was able to embrace my days as a mom in peace, at least on the surface, like the protagonist of a happy ending story I initially imagined. The in-laws were overjoyed with the twin girls, and those were truly happy times. I thought I had achieved a perfect happiness in my life. Then, as I was basking in this happiness, Stanley started coming home late. As I became busier with raising the twins with the help of the in-laws, Stanley's overtime increased. He started working on weekends too. "It's a busy period right now. You know how much we need for the kids, right? If I refuse the company's requests and get demoted, that'd be a real problem. I'm counting on you, with the help of my parents, to get through this. Stanley placed his hands on my shoulders, looked me firmly in the eyes, and said that. And then I thought, if Stanley is doing his best, I have to be a strong mom too. Raising twins was harder than I imagined. They wanted to nurse alternately every night. When one fell asleep, the other would wake up crying. Sometimes they cried just wanting to be held, not because their diapers were wet or they were hungry. I was completely exhausted. If the in-laws hadn't been there, I would have collapsed from the constant care and lack of sleep, all by myself. But the in-laws were kind. Even my father-in-law, Kevin, who said men didn't do much child-rearing in his time, hesitantly held and soothed the grandchildren, telling me to rest as much as possible. I was truly grateful. In that sense, I was like the protagonist of a really happy story. Only, this story had no prince, no Stanley, leaving a lingering sense of dissatisfaction, which I gradually got used to amidst the busyness. But one day, I discovered to Stanley from another woman among his things. It was a love letter to Stanley from a woman. It passionately recounted how wonderful their time together was, and how much she loved Stanley. What's this about? After seeing the note, Stanley made a disgusted face and said, "Who would do such a prank?" He picked up the note, insisting it was a troublesome prank. A prank? Should I believe that? When I pressed for confirmation, Stanley, with an annoyed look, said, "You don't trust me? I'm working my butt off for the family, and this makes me feel sick." He got angry, and I hurriedly apologized. His anger made it hard to believe he was lying at that moment. Now I understand that Stanley's anger was a way to prevent any further questioning. But back then, I still believed in Stanley and was afraid of angering him further and being disliked. At some point, the in-laws noticed something was off with me. They asked if I was worried about something, and I couldn't hold back any longer. I told them everything. Their faces changed immediately, and they apologized. "Sophia, we're so sorry. It might actually be true." Eh? What the in-laws told me next was shocking. Stanley, because of his good looks, had always been involved with different girls since high school, often seeing several at the same time. There were even times when these girls showed up at the house, starting brawls right in front of them. But none of these relationships lasted long, and the in-laws feared Stanley would continue this behavior and never settle down. "When he brought you home and said he wanted to marry you, and then we heard you were having children, we were so happy. We thought he had finally settled down." I felt my feelings for him cool instantly. I left the kids with the in-laws and decided to have a proper talk with Stanley. "I do want to trust you, but there's just too much that doesn't add up." For instance, there were charges for a theme park on a day he said he had to work, or he would come home late smelling like soap, claiming he had been working overtime. When I calmly thought about it, too many things didn't make sense. When I mentioned these things and asked for the truth, Stanley laughed and said, "You shouldn't have worried about such things. If you hadn't known, you could have remained happy." Hearing that, I felt as if the blood drained from my body. "Only you are married. Isn't that enough? Can't you be satisfied with just that?" How was I supposed to answer such a question? Perhaps because he had started speaking, Stanley couldn't stop, and his true feelings began to pour out. He married me because being married meant his parents wouldn't pressure him for marriage. I had no parents or relatives, so I was easy to handle. Making me quit my job meant I had no financial power and had to depend on him. I realized I had fallen right into Stanley's trap, just another convenient woman for him. "So, if you hate the idea of divorce, from now on, don't complain, got it?" I couldn't say anything, just silently bowed my head in front of Stanley, who laughed loudly. It was frustrating. After that, Stanley stopped hiding his actions completely. He would just say if we have any complaints, we should leave, to me and the in-laws alike. It seemed the in-laws wanted to believe in their son, but Stanley had reached a point where he was completely out of control, doing whatever he wanted. I almost gave up at one point. As Stanley said, without a job and with twin babies to care for, I had no means to live. I thought about suing Stanley for his infidelity, but the effort, time, and money it would require seemed too much to take any action. If I just quietly let him do as he pleased, at least I could live, survive. I even considered pretending not to know, fooling myself into believing he was a good husband. But what changed my mind was none other than the in-laws. They made me a proposal, and I decided to accept it. From that day, I started making efforts for that day, with the help of the in-laws. 3 years passed. Again with the cheating. Please, let's just get a divorce. After 4 years of marriage, which wasn't all that long, I finally asked for a divorce. My in-laws sided with me, sternly voicing their opinions to Stanley. Stanley seemed furious at first, but then gave a sleazy smile. Fine, I'll give you a divorce. But there's a condition. And said, name any condition you want. I just don't intend to stay your wife any longer. I presented the filled-out divorce papers. Stanley appeared surprised, but said, then take my parents and our 2 kids and get out. No division of property or child support. Stanley continued with a mocking thin smile. See, being cheated on is partially your fault too. I'm tired of your gloomy face. Plus, a handsome man with a history of divorce has a certain allure to women, doesn't it? Not bad at all. It seems Stanley still didn't take my words seriously. He might have thought I would just obediently agree to everything. Taking his time, Stanley signed the divorce papers and threw them at my feet. I calmly picked them up and verified they were properly filled out. If Dad and Mom side with that woman, be prepared to hit the road with her. Stanley said this with a sleazy laugh, even to his own parents. Are you even a father? Kevin angrily said to Stanley. A kid, huh? If I want, I can have as many as I like. Especially without them, I won't be missing anything. Such unbelievable words came out of his mouth. Sophia, this boy is no good anymore. We're sorry. It's our responsibility for raising such a person. Matilda, with tears in her eyes, apologized. It's time to change your mind and leave him. Apologized. Stanley seemed amused watching us talk. The next day, while Stanley was at work, I left the house with the kids and the in-laws. I also submitted the divorce papers to the city hall. Everything went according to plan. Stanley, who rarely came home, hadn't noticed, but besides his bedroom, almost no belongings were left in the other rooms. It was a house where Stanley, with his good public face, only came back to sleep, showing enough presence to the neighbors not to arouse suspicion. What was inside didn't concern him at all, it seemed. We had already secured a new place and had been moving our belongings there little by little. For the day of the plan, we had arranged everything without Stanley noticing, leaving only old furniture, scraps, and non-essentials. It seemed Stanley didn't come back the next day either, with no contact from him. He either didn't believe we had actually left or thought it was some kind of punishment, but well, it's no concern of mine anymore. A week later, Stanley finally called. Hey, where are you? Why is the house empty? Stanley finally seemed to notice that almost nothing was left in the house. I don't know what he thought about us not being there, but he was angry about the missing items and called my mobile phone. Why? Because I took what we needed and got rid of what we didn't. I think I left everything you need for your life. Indeed, only the essentials for Stanley to live minimally were left. Dishes, shampoo, and body soap, just enough for a bath, towels, and a place to sleep, so the double bed we used to share was left as is. Well, I had been sleeping in the children's room beds with them, so we hardly ever shared it anymore. Also left were Stanley's clothes, his personal memorabilia, and some non-perishable food items like instant noodles and retort pouches in cardboard boxes. That should be enough for him to live on for a while. After all, we were married. That's the least bit of mercy I extended to him.
What about the TV and appliances?
I took all that because they're necessary for living.
Don't mess around. Those were bought with the money I earned.
That's true. Stanley took away my ability to work, removing my financial power, but he did provide enough money to maintain appearances.
Well, yes, but leaving them there, it's not certain if you could use them next, right? So, I took them. I sold some things that weren't needed.
What do you mean? That house, Kevin sold it, so you'll have to move out soon.
What?
Stanley yelled so loudly into the mobile phone it seemed he might damage his hearing. I patiently explained to Stanley. The house we had been living in, it was still in Kevin's name. So, he could sell it without consulting Stanley. That's why you should look for a new place as soon as possible. I packed your things to make it easier to move, didn't I?
Don't joke with me.
I wasn't joking. For this day, I had been planning with the in-laws. Oh, and by the way, you should be hearing from a lawyer soon. About the compensation for the divorce trial and child support.
I told you I wouldn't pay, and you agreed.
Indeed, you said so. But I never agreed. That's right, at that time, I said he could propose any condition, but I never agreed to accept them. And I'm also claiming compensation from all of your mistresses.
Don't be ridiculous. I won't pay a dime.
If you choose not to pay, that's fine. In that case, we will take it to court, and you'll have to pay according to the court's order. By this point, Stanley seemed to realize I was serious. 3 years ago, when Stanley admitted everything and stopped hiding his affairs, thinking that I and the in-laws would silently comply, the in-laws made a proposal.
Sophia, find a job. We'll take care of the children.
Yes, stand on your own, and then leave Stanley and live with the children. The in-laws offered me time. Taking advantage of their offer, I started with a part-time job and became a full-time employee over 3 years. Stanley, hardly ever home during the day and rarely returning at night, amusingly never noticed. Conversely, I made a proposal to the in-laws.
Kevin, Matilda, let's leave this house together and live together.
Initially hesitant, after many discussions, Kevin decided to sell the house for us to live together. We refined the plan in more detail. Sell the house. Buy a new one with the money, where the in-laws, I, and the children could move. Stanley earned a good salary, so we would claim a significant amount in divorce compensation and child support without hesitation, knowing Stanley would refuse. But we had ample evidence. Over 3 years, we also collected that evidence. You may not know, but the statute for claiming compensation in a divorce due to infidelity is 3 years from becoming aware of it. I've claimed compensation from every mistress I know of during our marriage. It's going to be a considerable amount. On the other end of the phone, Stanley silently listened to me. If you refuse to pay, I'll contact your company to garnish your wages. If you don't like that, please pay properly. And make sure to inform us of your new address, or else I'll have to contact your company. Stanley didn't respond at all. He must be confused. Well, I don't need a response to get what's owed to me. Hey. Suddenly, I heard Stanley's voice.
What?
Why don't we start over?
What?
I was surprised by the sudden suggestion. Come on, it'll be okay. Stanley continued in a sweet voice. We're married, aren't we? Don't be so cold. Come on. Stanley seemed to think that sweet-talking me would make me cave. I'm sorry, but we're no longer married. The divorce papers have already been filed.
We can get remarried.
Stanley immediately responded. Wouldn't it be better for the kids to have both parents together? Does he not remember saying he could make kids with anyone and didn't need the ones he had with me? Absolutely ridiculous. Sorry, but those kids are mine alone. Maybe you should go make new ones with someone else. I said that and hung up the phone. Later, I received multiple contacts from the mistresses I had sent legal notices to through my lawyer. Some were married, and those women paid promptly, not wanting their husbands to find out. Each woman paid more easily than I thought. Hiring a lawyer who specialized in infidelity and divorce was well worth it. There were many of them. Though I didn't demand a high amount from each, collectively, it was enough to raise my children without worries and afford their education. Stanley tried to contact me several times afterward, always attempting to sweet-talk me into coming back. Instead of that, please respond to the legal notice from my lawyer. Don't be so cold, come on. He desperately clung on, but there was zero chance I'd agree. Then, Stanley, as if struck by a sudden thought, said,
Hey, where are you living now? You want to come back here, right? It's still possible to return, make a bold move and come back.
Don't worry. I sent him a photo that showed our new place vaguely, enough to see it was a high-rise tower apartment from the glimpse of the sky visible through the window.
Your new place?
Stanley was speechless seeing the photo. Yes, we were living in what's known as a tower mansion. High enough to suggest it from the piece of sky in the photo.
Please, let me live there with you.
No. I flatly refused and said,
From now on, please don't contact me unless it's through a lawyer.
I blocked Stanley and changed my mobile phone. That should prevent any direct contact from him. According to my lawyer, Stanley desperately tried to reach out but was firmly denied. And when it was made clear that we'd pursue wage garnishment unless he paid the divorce settlement and child support, he finally gave in and agreed to pay. I preferred a lump sum payment to avoid any prolonged connection. Whether he borrowed the money or had savings was irrelevant now. Now, I work while the in-laws look after the kids. Even though I received enough compensation to not work, you never know what life brings. It's better to keep working. Plus, working keeps me connected to society. I used to work in sales before my marriage and enjoy interacting with people, so I'm happy working every day. When Stanley told me to quit my job and I was confined to taking care of the children at home, I felt isolated from society. Though I was on good terms with the in-laws, people need social connections. My marriage felt like falling from heaven to hell, but having my two lovely daughters and finding new parents in the in-laws are things I must thank Stanley for. As for Stanley, after the women he wronged learned about his actions through my lawsuit, and his workplace found out, he was demoted and transferred to a regional branch. Despite his looks, rumors and his debts from the divorce and child support deterred any women from getting close. Either way, he's someone else's problem now. I cherish my current family, looking forward to a bright future. I'm genuinely enjoying my days.